The wind had a voice that night, low, guttural, like something ancient stirred in the sea and came howling through the trees. I hadn't meant to leave the lights on in the shed, but when the power flickered and the rain started coming down sideways, I caught a glimpse of something moving just outside my window. At first, I thought it was debris. Then I saw eyes, 3 sets, low to the ground, glinting against the dim yellow glow. Strays, soaked to the bone, clumped fur stuck to their skinny frames. They moved like shadows with bones. I didn't think. I just grabbed my coat and opened the door. The cold sliced through me, but they didn't flinch. I should have turned them away. I wasn't the saving type, but something in their quiet desperation made it impossible to close that door again. Not that night, not in that storm. I never liked storms. Not just because of the noise or the way the wind twisted through the gaps in my old cottage walls, but because they always brought things with them. Memories, mostly. I'd spend them alone, keeping my mind occupied sanding wood or oiling hinges, pretending the pounding outside didn't match the rhythm of my heart. But that night was different. The wind was relentless. Trees cracked in the distance like bones snapping under pressure. I'd gone out to check on the shed, more habit than concern. And there they were, huddled behind a pile of broken crates, half submerged in mud. 3 of them, no sound, just eyes and trembling shapes. I'd never seen cats look like that. They didn't dart away. They just watched me, waiting like I was the one being tested. I opened the shed door and stepped aside. That was it. No coaxing, no soft words, just shelter and the choice to take it. Ash came first, big black thing, soaked through but proud. He walked past me like he owned the place, tail dragging in the mud. Then came Mallow, slower, limping badly on her right front paw. She hesitated but followed Ash's lead. Cricket didn't move. I stood there, letting the rain soak through my coat, watching this tiny gray slip of a cat tremble, eyes locked on mine. Something in me cracked, something I didn't know was still tender. I crouched down, stretching my hand into the dark. "You coming or not?" She didn't. Not that night. Inside the shed, the smell of damp straw and old varnish greeted the new guests. I threw down a couple of old towels, tore open a tin of tuna, best I had, and placed it in the corner. Ash didn't even wait. Mallow nudged beside him, careful on her paw. I sat on a stool across the room, watching like an intruder in my own space. I didn't have plans for them. Wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't walk away. That first hour felt like a truce. Ash curled up in a broken basket like he'd been here for years. Mallow groomed herself obsessively, like if she cleaned long enough, she'd forget the cold. I went inside, grabbed an old sleeping bag and dragged it back to the shed. I didn't plan to sleep, but I wasn't leaving either. I left the door cracked in case Cricket changed her mind. Sometime around 3 a.m., the wind stopped screaming and the quiet was worse. I stirred from half sleep, and there she was, perched by the door like a ghost. She looked at me, then at the others, and finally limped inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't sleep after that. I just watched them. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. There was a hush that settled over the shed in the hours after the storm, as if the battered world outside had paused to draw breath, and all that remained was the small, trembling reality inside these 4 worn walls. I stayed hunched against the old workbench, the draft creeping under the door, the air thick with the mingled scents of wet fur, oil, and sawdust. Ash sprawled at the heart of the shed, his long black body taking up more space than seemed possible, gold eyes wide open and unblinking in the dim glow of the lantern. Each of his movements was deliberate, as though he were both the sentinel and the sovereign of this unlikely little kingdom. Mallow had curled herself in a tight, wary spiral in the old wicker basket, the limp of her injured paw almost forgotten in the comfort of the soft towels. I could see how her ribcage rose and fell in shallow bursts, her entire being locked in that instinctive readiness to flee at the first misstep, yet too exhausted to act on it. And Cricket, tiny and barely more than a shadow, remained the wild card, her entire body pressed into the darkest corner, ears flattened and eyes flickering from me to the other cats and back again, always measuring, never still. The rain had eased, but the cold gnawed deeper, making every breath feel raw in my chest. I watched condensation beat along the windows, tracing lines through the dust and grime like nature's own etchings, and I let my gaze drift over the silent negotiations taking place in the room. Ash radiated confidence, moving only when he needed to. But when he did, the others took notice. His authority was not just in posture, but in the measured restraint of a creature who'd learned how to survive. Mallow, in contrast, was softer, a nervous energy embodied in every twitch of her tail, and when she ventured to eat again, she glanced between each mouthful as though expecting it to vanish. Cricket, meanwhile, seemed determined to be invisible, tensed and folded in on herself so thoroughly that it was easy to forget she was even there until the lantern's flicker caught the brief glint of her eyes. As the hours ticked by, I found my own awareness shifting. I was no longer simply an observer in this tableau, but an unwilling participant in their drama. My own anxieties braided together with theirs. Every small sound, a branch scraping the window, the distant shudder of wind, felt amplified, and each time Ash or Mallow reacted, so did I. Even my heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the tension in the shed. I wanted to do more, to reach out and reassure them, but I also knew how quickly trust could shatter. So I moved slowly, replenishing water, rearranging towels, speaking only in low, careful tones. I remembered something Nia Caldwell, the town's young veterinarian, once told me, that patience is the truest kindness when it comes to creatures shaped by hardship. I wondered then if she'd approve of this impromptu sanctuary, if she'd have done things differently, or if she would recognize the silent contract forming in this small, liminal space. With dawn still hours away, and the world outside paused in uncertainty, I realized I was waiting, just as they were, for whatever would come next. By the time morning arrived, the rain had slackened into a dull, steady drizzle, and the world beyond the shed door looked strangely unfamiliar. The trees were stripped and sagging, the fields drowned in waterlogged sorrow, and the usual hush of Gallowmere had turned into a landscape of muffled collapse. Branches hung twisted like broken limbs, fences flattened, and the coastal wind still murmured like a warning half-spoken. Inside, a fragile stillness had taken hold, as though the cats and I had become part of something sacred, untouched by the storm's final breath. I didn't move much, still wrapped in the sleeping bag, bones aching and clothes damp, but I was awake, fully, deeply, painfully awake. And it was in that still moment, while Ash stretched and blinked at the morning gloom, that I noticed the blood. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. Just a faint smear along the worn floorboards near Mallow's basket, a reddish arc too sharp to be mud, too fresh to ignore. I rose slowly, not wanting to startle her, but the moment I stepped closer, her eyes snapped open and a low, barely audible growl rattled from her throat. She didn't move, but her whole body stiffened, vibrating with the tension of something tightly coiled. I crouched down and saw it, the wound. Her front paw, already limping, was worse than I'd realized. Swollen and oozing from a deep gash near the joint, it pulsed with angry redness that spread up toward her chest. She'd been licking it all night, hiding the worst of it beneath her silence, but the infection had already started to set in. Panic isn't always loud. Sometimes it creeps in like a slow burn, like the tightening of a rope you didn't know was around your neck. I knelt beside her, whispering her name softly, though I wasn't even sure it was her name. I didn't know where these cats had come from, who they had belonged to, or what they had survived to get here. But now she was mine in some unspoken way, and the thought of her suffering in silence gutted something in me I hadn't touched in years. I needed help. The problem was, getting it meant breaking the invisible wall I'd built between my life and everyone else's. It meant calling Nia Caldwell, who had offered help more times than I could count, and who I'd brushed off each time with a shrug or silence. I'd have to let her into this moment, this fragile little world I hadn't yet decided was real. Ash watched me as I pulled my phone from the pocket of my coat. His eyes weren't judging, but they weren't passive either. They seemed to say, "This choice matters." I called her. The line crackled once, then rang. One ring, two. Then her voice calm, warm, curious. "Theo?" And just like that, the rescue was no longer mine alone. Nia arrived just after noon, her truck crunching over the gravel path with the caution of someone stepping into another person's silence. She climbed out slowly, her boots sinking slightly in the rain-heavy earth, a battered satchel slung over one shoulder, and a knitted scarf wrapped too many times around her neck. She didn't speak right away, just took one long look at the shed, the door I'd left slightly ajar, and then met my eyes like she could see everything I hadn't said over the last year in that one moment. I wanted to explain why I'd finally called her. I wanted to tell her about the blood, the limp, the cold night, the eyes at the door. But all that came out was a half-whispered, "She's worse than I thought." Inside, the air was warmer now. I'd fixed the small heater in the corner and lined the walls with insulation I'd never bothered to use in the house. The shed had become something more than it was meant to be, part shelter, part confession, a space where the cats and I existed outside of time. Mallow lifted her head when Naya entered, her eyes hazy and rimmed with discomfort. She didn't protest when Naya approached, only shifted her weight and let out a small, broken noise that made my throat close. Cricket bolted behind a stack of crates the second the door creaked. Ash remained where he was, muscles tensing as his gaze followed Nia's every move, not quite trusting, not quite ready to flee either. Nia moved like she'd done this 1,000 times. Soft murmurs, slow hands, a practiced eye scanning the wound with focused tenderness. She cleaned around the gash with gentle precision, her touch firm but never rough, and I could see Mallow's body trembling under her fingers, not from fear, but from the release of tension. She'd been holding it all in, just like me. As Nia worked, we barely spoke. Words would have felt too sharp, too heavy in that space. But then she looked up, brushing her hair from her face, and said quietly, "She's lucky you found her." I didn't know how to respond. Lucky wasn't a word I felt worthy of. I hadn't found them so much as stumbled across them. And even then, part of me still wondered if I would have kept walking had Ash not stared me down, like he was challenging me to make a different choice. But the cats weren't the only ones reacting to the shift. Ash had begun pacing the perimeter of the shed since Nia arrived, his body language protective, tense, as though her presence disrupted the unspoken code we'd all fallen into. He didn't hiss, didn't lash out, but the message was clear. She was new, and the balance had changed. Cricket remained invisible, her silence now stretched into hours, and I couldn't help but wonder if the sudden appearance of another human had unraveled the tiny thread of trust she'd been spinning. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like I was seeing a reflection of myself in their reactions. I, too, wasn't sure how much to let her in. By the following morning, word had already begun to drift through Gallowmere, quiet as wood smoke and twice as stubborn. Someone had spotted Nia's truck parked outside my place, and in a town where people noticed if your chimney hadn't smoked for a day, it didn't take long for questions to start floating from porch to porch. At the bakery, someone asked if I'd fallen ill. At the grocer's, a few murmured that maybe Nia had finally gotten through to me, though no one dared speak it too loud. But by the time Mr. Dunley showed up at the edge of my driveway, holding a soggy brown bag and looking like he'd wandered out of a dream, I knew the quiet wouldn't last much longer. He didn't ask to come in, just stood there, glancing at the shed like he already knew. "They came, didn't they?" he said, his voice brittle and salt-cracked from years on the sea. "After the rain, same as before." There was something in his eyes, more memory than curiosity, and he handed me the bag without explanation. Inside were cans of sardines, a faded wool blanket, and a cracked tin of salve. "That little black one's Ash, right? Mean stare?" he asked, and when I nodded, he gave a knowing grunt. "Figured he was still alive, except that one's got fight." It turned out Dunley had been feeding the stray colonies for years, long before anyone noticed. He called it penance, though he never said for what. He knew them by name, by story even. Told me that Ash once pulled a kitten from a drain pipe, that Mallow had wandered limping along the coastal path since spring, and that Cricket, well, Cricket had never let anyone close. "She's got wild in her bones," he muttered. "Can't take that out, not without breaking her." His visit left more questions than comfort. How long had these cats been surviving out here? How many storms had they endured without a door left ajar? And more than that, what right did I have to decide what happened next? Later that afternoon, Nia returned with supplies. Antibiotics for Mallow, dry bedding, more food. But something about her energy had shifted. She seemed more cautious, as though she, too, had felt the weight of the town beginning to lean in. Theo, she said quietly as she unpacked gauze and gloves, if we're keeping them here, even short term, people are going to want to know. Some of these cats, people have been trying to trap and rehome them for years. I didn't answer right away. The idea of cages and carriers, of strangers deciding fates based on behavior and marketability, it churned in my gut like spoiled milk. These weren't puzzles to solve or problems to fix. They were survivors, and they'd chosen me, if only for now. But the real question lingered between us. Had I taken responsibility, or had I simply gotten in the way? The days stretched into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Quiet mornings filled with small rituals, evenings blurred in the dim light of the shed, and long nights lying awake with thoughts that rustled louder than the trees outside. Mallow's wound had begun to heal, her limp softening into something more manageable, and Ash had taken to patrolling the perimeter like a sentry, occasionally slipping out through the cracked window only to return a few hours later, as if reminding me that his loyalty came with conditions. Even Cricket had begun to emerge from the shadows, no longer vanishing the moment I entered the shed, though she still wouldn't let me within arm's reach. She'd sit just close enough that I could hear her breathing if the world got quiet, always watching, always measuring. It was subtle, but the shift had happened. They weren't just here anymore. They were mine, or at least I had started to believe they were. But with that belief came a weight I hadn't anticipated. The more time I spent with them, the more I caught myself wondering where they would end up. Nia had been gentle but persistent, asking each time she visited whether I'd thought about rehoming them, especially Mallow, who with the right care could recover fully. She brought pamphlets, contact numbers, photos of people willing to foster. If they stay too long, they'll imprint on this place, she said, carefully avoiding the word you. But I wasn't sure who had imprinted on whom. It wasn't just their safety I was guarding anymore. It was the strange, flickering sense of peace they brought with them, a quietness I hadn't known I needed until it filled the corners of my life. I found myself hesitating before opening the shed, not because I feared what I'd find, but because I feared what it would mean when I didn't find them there someday. The idea of letting them go, placing them in someone else's care, letting strangers decide their worth, their home, their fate, it clawed at me. I told myself it was about trust, about whether they'd be safe, whether anyone else would understand their different rhythms, their language of silence and slow movement. But in truth, I was scared of losing them. Not just the cats, but what they represented. They'd walked into the ruins of my solitude and quietly, methodically laid claim to it. I couldn't remember what it felt like to sit alone in the shed without Ash's heavy breath near the door or Mallow's tail flicking softly against the basket. I couldn't remember if I ever wanted to. One evening, after Naya left, I sat with the door open, watching the mist curl through the trees. I whispered into the quiet, not really to them, but not just to myself either. Is this selfish? Keeping you here because I don't want to go back to before? None of them stirred. But in that silence, I heard the truth I hadn't spoken aloud. I wasn't just rescuing them anymore. They were rescuing me. It began with the silence. Not the kind that settles like a blanket, soft and welcome, but the kind that makes your skin tighten, that prickles at the edge of instinct and makes you listen harder because something should be there, but isn't. I noticed it in the early morning, just after the sky turned that bruised color before dawn. I hadn't heard Ash's usual soft thump against the door, no sound of Mallow licking her fur, no quiet rustle of Cricket darting behind the crates when she thought I was close, just stillness, sharp and hollow. I pulled on my boots and stepped into the shed, expecting to find them asleep, tucked into corners like usual. But Ash was gone. Gone. At first I told myself it wasn't unusual. He came and went. He had always been the one to explore, to test the borders of our little world and return when he chose. But something felt off. The window he used to slip out had been shut. Not latched, but gently pressed closed, as if someone had pushed it shut from the outside. And near the entrance, along the muddy floor, I saw the imprint of a boot, bigger than mine, fresher than it should have been. Panic rose in me like bile. I didn't think. I searched, behind the shed, along the tree line, down the gravel road toward the fields. I called his name, not aloud, but under my breath, as if speaking it too loudly would make his absence real. I crouched in the underbrush, fingers clawing through wet leaves, eyes scanning for black fur, a glint of yellow eyes, nothing. Just wind and the low groan of the earth soaked too long in rain. By noon, Nia arrived. I hadn't called her this time. She came on her own, sensing something had shifted. She found me crouched behind the woodpile, mud up to my knees, eyes bloodshot from scanning shadows. "He's gone," I said without turning. She didn't ask who. She didn't have to. Back in the shed, Mallow pressed herself into the corner of the basket, her gaze darting toward the closed window, her body curled tight like she was waiting for something else to vanish. Even Cricket, who rarely showed emotion in anything other than distance, was tense, her eyes sharp, her ears flat, her tiny body rigid and alert. They felt it too. We checked the perimeter together, Nia and I, a strange dance of urgency and quiet dread. But what I couldn't shake wasn't just that Ash was missing. It was the footprint. Someone had been here. Someone new. That night, I locked the shed door for the first time. I sat with my back against it, staring out at the trees, unsure of what was watching from beyond the branches. Ash was missing. And suddenly, this wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about protection. The air inside the shed had changed. It wasn't just the absence of Ash that haunted the space, but the way his absence unbalanced everything else, as if his presence had been the silent glue binding this fragile world together. Without him, Mallow grew restless, her movements nervous and repetitive, pacing the shed with a limp that had once been her burden, but now seemed like a tether to something deeper, more unsettled. She would sit at the base of the closed window for hours, staring through the condensation-streaked glass into the woods beyond, occasionally letting out a small sound. Not a cry exactly, more like a question half-formed in her throat. Cricket had withdrawn almost completely again. Whatever progress she had made in trusting me had withered under the weight of this new tension. She stayed hidden behind the storage boxes, emerging only when I pretended not to watch, darting like smoke through the shadows, pausing at the edges of the lamplight before vanishing again. I kept waiting for the sound of paws on the roof or the slow push of the shed door, nudging open in the middle of the night, for Ash to return in the same defiant silence he had always carried, like he belonged here and we had only been keeping his seat warm. But as the days passed and no sign came, doubt began to rot at the edges of hope. I started to blame myself in ways I didn't speak aloud. Maybe I had let the shed become too visible. Maybe I had stayed too long with the door open. Maybe in my effort to create sanctuary, I had drawn attention, and in doing so, marked them. Still, I couldn't stop. I found myself cleaning their bedding more often than needed, checking the heater 3 times a day, laying out food in the faint chance Ash would return. I even began to read aloud to them, half out of habit, half in desperation. It started with the newspaper, then with Grace's old books I had stored in a box I hadn't opened since she died. Her handwriting was still scrawled in the margins, little notes and underlines and half-finished thoughts. Mallow would lie near me when I read, her breathing syncing with my voice, sometimes lifting her head when a word struck just right. Cricket, though distant, seemed to listen too, her ears twitching even when she remained hidden. Naya came by less often now. The last time she'd brought a larger carrier, saying gently that it might be time to consider rehoming. "They've grown attached to you," she said, avoiding my eyes, "but sometimes the most compassionate thing is to let them go where they'll be safest." I nodded, but the words hollowed out inside me. Safe was a word that had started to feel like a lie. Safe hadn't saved Ash. Safe hadn't protected them from the world that kept creeping closer. Later that night, as rain returned like an old enemy, I sat in the corner of the shed with the book open in my lap and whispered a sentence Grace had once underlined twice. "Some things are lost not because they are weak, but because the world wants to test what we are willing to fight for." And as the wind scraped against the walls and the cat settled into uneasy sleep, I finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding since the beginning. Was I strong enough to fight for them? Or was I just trying to keep something broken from slipping through my fingers again? The turning point came not with drama, but with a quiet that felt too clean, like a held breath that stretched just a second too long. It was just before dusk, the sky heavy with low clouds that glowed a sickly gray, the kind of sky that made the world feel paused, suspended, expectant. I'd spent the afternoon repairing a leak in the shed roof, kneeling on damp wood as the wind brushed through the trees with the soft whistle of an old lullaby. Mallow watched me the whole time, her eyes sharp, intelligent, following each movement like she was cataloging my intent. Cricket hadn't come out in 2 days, and despite the food slowly vanishing from her corner, I hadn't seen her. Not a paw, not a tail. I had the creeping sense that she was pulling away, preparing herself to vanish like wild things often do when they feel the world changing around them. That evening, as I lit the lantern and settled beside the heater, a sound broke through the quiet. Tires on gravel, slow, hesitant. I stood, peering through the warped glass of the shed side window, heart thudding in a rhythm too loud to ignore. A dark blue van pulled up to the edge of the lane, the kind the council used for animal control. The logo was faded, but the implication wasn't. My pulse crashed against my chest as the driver stepped out, middle-aged, high-visibility jacket, clipboard in hand. I didn't need to ask why he was here. Someone had said something. Someone had decided that the quiet little ecosystem we'd created was a problem to be solved. I met him at the gate. He was polite, firm, said they'd received a tip, feral cats seen around the property, a concern for livestock and disease. It was all framed in gentle language, but I heard the undertones clearly. "We've had trouble before," he said, nodding toward the tree line. "We try to relocate them humanely. If they're unfit, we do what's necessary." Necessary. That word fell like an axe. I told him they were being treated, that a vet was involved, that this wasn't some random infestation. But he held the clipboard between us like a shield. He said he'd be back in a week, that they'd assess the situation, that I should be prepared for recommendations. I nodded, because arguing would have only sealed things faster. But inside, something began to unravel. When I returned to the shed, the air felt thinner, like the cats could sense what had passed between me and the outside world. Mallow stood in the center of the floor, body stiff, eyes wide. Cricket was nowhere. I searched for her until long past midnight, crawling behind tools, under crates, beneath the decking out back, but nothing. Not a sound. She had disappeared completely, leaving behind only the faintest imprint in the dust where she used to sleep. I sat in the center of the shed, cold creeping up my spine, and finally accepted what I had been avoiding. I could no longer protect them all, not in the way I wanted. A decision was coming, and it would not wait for me to feel ready. The week that followed passed like a dream in slow collapse, each day pressing down heavier than the last. The shed, once a sanctuary wrapped in the gentle hum of breathing and the soft thud of paws against wood, had begun to feel like a waiting room for judgment. I spent most hours there, sometimes fixing things that didn't need fixing, tightening hinges, resanding a beam, rearranging the bedding, anything to avoid looking directly at the moment that was coming. Mallow still lingered, though she moved differently now, warier, always watching the door as if expecting it to be opened not by me but by something that would take her away. Her paw had healed almost fully, though the limp remained, a ghost of pain that never quite left. I could relate to that more than I wanted to admit. Nia returned midweek, unannounced this time, her face drawn tight with concern and a fatigue that told me the conversations she'd been having on my behalf weren't going well. She knelt in the shed, gently checking Mallow over, running her hand down her back in slow, practiced strokes, but her silence held weight. When she finally spoke, it was in a whisper, like she was afraid saying it aloud would make it final. "They'll be back soon. They won't take them right away, but they'll want a plan. They'll ask who's taking responsibility." She paused, met my eyes. "They'll ask if you're letting them go or taking them in." I said nothing, because everything inside me was still clenching against the shape of the answer. I wanted to keep them. God, I wanted to keep them more than anything. But what did keeping mean? It wasn't just food and shelter. It was vaccines, papers, inspections. It was control relinquished to systems and checklists, to names in a database that didn't understand how Ash used to curl his tail like a question mark, how Cricket moved like a breath of wind, or how Mallow, despite her limp, always settled nearest to the door, as if guarding what we had built from the outside world. That night, after Nia left, I sat with Mallow in the quiet again. and this time I spoke the thoughts I'd held too long. "I can't lose you," I said softly, my hand resting just beside her curled body. "But I don't know if I can keep you either. Not in the way they want." She blinked slowly, then laid her head on her paw, and I knew she didn't need my words. She already knew. The wild in her had never left. It had just learned to be still. At some point in the early hours, I opened the shed door and stood in the mist, letting the cold settle into my skin until it became something grounding. I looked toward the tree line and realized I wasn't waiting for Ash anymore. I was waiting for permission. And maybe, just maybe, I had to stop waiting. Because the decision wasn't whether I loved them enough to fight. It was whether I loved them enough to let go. By the time the van returned, the morning fog hadn't yet lifted from the fields, and the trees stood like still witnesses to the choices waiting inside me. The man from the council stepped out again, this time accompanied by a woman in a windbreaker with a clipboard of her own and a face too neutral to read. They didn't knock. They waited by the gate, hands in pockets, not out of patience but protocol. Their presence was heavy, like the air before thunder, and for a long time I didn't move. I watched them through the narrow crack of the shed door while Mallow pressed her body against the wall, her eyes wide and unblinking, already sensing the fracture in our little world. Cricket hadn't returned. It had been 4 days, no sign, no paw prints, no food disturbed in her hidden corner. Part of me believed she was gone for good, that she had returned to the forest the same way she had arrived, in silence, unclaimed and unreachable. But another part refused to say it aloud. Naming loss gives it power, and I wasn't ready to hand over one more piece of this fragile story. The officials had come for answers. They didn't demand, not yet, but their words were wrapped in calm finality. "We need to know what the next steps are. If you're fostering, we need documentation. If not, we have to prepare for transfer." Transfer, another word meant to soften something sharp. Another layer of separation designed to make letting go feel procedural instead of personal. I told them I needed time. One more day. They hesitated but agreed, leaving behind a pamphlet thick with rules and checkboxes and contingency plans. I didn't watch them leave. I went back into the shed and sat with Mallow, her breath slow, her tail flicking with tension. I whispered apologies into the space between us, not knowing which one of us they were meant for. That evening, as the sun finally broke through the gloom for the first time in nearly a week, I found myself walking past the boundary of the property, into the woods where the storm had once howled. I moved slowly, calling softly, no names, just the hum of my voice, like a song I didn't know I remembered. I didn't expect to find her, but I needed to try. Every part of me ached with the weight of things unspoken, and I couldn't bear the idea that this story might end without one last attempt. When I returned hours later, empty-handed, Mallow was still there, eyes steady, no longer pacing, no longer searching. She looked at me like she had already accepted what I couldn't say, that sometimes love means staying, and sometimes it means leaving the door open. That night I sat in the shed with the door wide, the air cool, the trees silent. I didn't sleep. I waited, not for a sign, not for a cat, but for the moment I would know what to do. And I felt it rising, slow and heavy, just beyond the edge of morning. At first light, I walked out to the edge of the lane where the gravel met the trees, the sky above me glowing soft and pink with the kind of dawn that always feels like forgiveness. I carried nothing, no cage, no leashes, no plan. Just the stillness I'd been holding inside my chest for days, and the quiet resolve that had settled over me in the night like snowfall. When the van rolled up slow and steady, I was already standing there, waiting. No more hiding behind shed walls. No more pretending the decision wasn't mine to make. The woman with the clipboard stepped out first. She gave me a look, not unkind but expectant. Behind her, the driver opened the rear doors. I could see the lined cages inside, blanketed and ready, the metallic smell of sterilized plastic curling into the breeze. For a moment, I felt my knees go hollow, as though my body remembered something I was trying not to. I thought of Ash, of his long black body slipping through the cracked window that final night, leaving behind a silence so sharp it had reshaped everything that came after. I thought of Cricket, half wild and full of ghosts, who had taught me that trust is a currency earned, not given. And I thought of Mallow, who even now waited in the shed, her golden fur glowing in the warm beam of morning light, eyes soft, shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since the night they first appeared. "I'm not handing them over," I said finally, my voice low but steady. The words hung there, weighty and unapologetic. Not into cages, not into systems that don't know them. The woman blinked slowly, already reaching for a form. "You understand that means assuming full responsibility, including medical, licensing, any necessary evaluations." "I understand," I cut in, "but I'm not adopting them either, not in the way you're asking." Her brows pulled slightly together. "Then what are you doing?" I looked past her, into the woods, then up at the sky, where gulls drifted high above the trees. "I'm letting them choose. I'll keep the shed open, keep food, warmth, safety here. If they want to stay, they stay. If they want to go, they go. I won't lock them in and I won't chase them down. I'm not saving them, I'm giving them the space to save themselves." There was a silence that followed, long and strange and full of something I couldn't quite name. The woman glanced at her clipboard again but didn't write anything. She simply nodded once, sharply, then said, "We'll mark it as monitored independent care." And that was it. They left without another word, the gravel crunching under their tires as they disappeared back down the road. I walked back to the shed and opened the door wide. Mallow blinked up at me from her basket, then stood, stretched, and crossed the floor toward the open light. She stopped just shy of the threshold, the air brushing against her fur, and looked back at me once. Then she stepped outside. Not to run, not to leave, but just to feel what it was like to choose. The days that followed felt like the breath after a long-held note. Not release exactly, something quieter, like the air had shifted but hadn't yet settled. I didn't know what to expect once I'd opened that door and let the world decide its own rhythm again. But that's the thing about choosing not to control something. You learn to live with the not knowing. Mallow still comes every day. Sometimes she sleeps in the basket, sometimes in the patch of sun just beside the heater. She never strays far, though I've noticed her paw no longer favors the ground quite so gingerly. She's stronger now, quieter in a different way, not from fear, but from contentment. And Cricket, she returned on the 6th day. No fanfare, no sound. I found her curled beneath the shelves, fast asleep as if she'd never left at all. I didn't touch her, just sat nearby, said nothing, and let her presence fill the space like a miracle you don't dare claim. Ash never came back. There are nights when I hear rustling in the trees or spot a black silhouette moving along the hill crest, tail high, gaze sharp. Maybe it's him, maybe it isn't. But in my heart, he's still out there somewhere, walking his own path because that's who he was. His absence taught me the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the ones who save you don't stay. And that's not a failure. It's a gift you carry quietly into the rest of your life. People still talk. Gallowmere is a town of half-finished stories and long-held opinions. They ask what happened to the cats, whether I've dealt with it. I give them the only answer I know how. I didn't deal with them. I lived with them. And now we live around each other, together and apart, in a way that makes sense only to us. Some might call it unfinished. I call it peace. If you're watching this and expecting a clean ending, adoption papers, matching collars, a family photo with a soft acoustic guitar playing behind it, I'm sorry. That's not what this was. This was real, messy, slow, beautiful in a way that didn't always feel good. I didn't rescue them, not really. I just opened a door and chose to keep it open every single day, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. So if you've ever found yourself standing in the rain, unsure whether to take something wild and broken into your life, do it. Not to fix it, not to claim it, but to listen, to learn what it needs. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find something inside yourself you didn't know was still there, waiting to be brought back in from the storm. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of a moment, a choice, or a life you once opened your heart to, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me what rescued you. And if you're still out there searching, know this. Sometimes the door doesn't have to be closed. Sometimes all it takes is leaving it open.